I never imagined that one day I'd be running a successful business. Growing up, I was the typical kid with big dreams, but no clear path to make them a reality. I came from a working-class family where money was always tight. My parents taught me the value of hard work, but I always knew I wanted more than just a paycheck-to-paycheck existence. I wanted to create something of my own, but like most people, I had no idea how to get started. It all began when I was 23 and still trying to figure out my life. I had just graduated college with a degree in marketing, but I wasn't passionate about anything. My first job was at a small digital marketing agency. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. I spent my days running ads on Google, optimizing websites, and dealing with clients who often had unrealistic expectations. I quickly realized I hated the corporate grind. The more I worked, the more I wanted out. But I had no idea what to do instead. One night, after a particularly brutal day at work, I sat down at my kitchen table, frustrated, and started thinking. I had learned a lot about digital marketing, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't using my skills to create something I could truly call my own. So, I decided to take the plunge and start something on the side, a side hustle that could eventually replace my 9-to-5 job. I had always been obsessed with fitness. I wasn't an expert by any means, but I spent hours at the gym, reading articles, watching YouTube videos, and learning about different diets, workouts, and supplements. I had no formal training, but I figured there had to be a way to turn my passion into something profitable. I thought about starting a fitness blog, but that felt too saturated. Then it hit me. Why not create a personal training program that focused on sustainable fitness, one that wasn't about extreme diets or crazy workout routines? So, I started building my brand. I spent months researching, writing, and creating content. I filmed a few workout videos, developed meal plans, and launched a website. I didn't have much money, so I did everything myself. The first month, I barely made any sales. I was discouraged, but I didn't give up. I started posting more frequently on social media, engaging with people, and offering free fitness advice. Slowly but surely, I started gaining traction. I made my first sale at the end of the second month. It wasn't much, just $50, but it was a sign that people were interested in what I was doing. Over the next few months, I doubled down on my marketing efforts. I created a YouTube channel, started posting regularly on Instagram, and ran Facebook ads. I was working nights and weekends, pouring all my free time into building my business. I also started offering online coaching, where I would provide personalized workout plans and meal advice. I had no idea what I was doing, but I figured I had to keep learning and iterating. In the beginning, it was tough. I had to juggle my full-time job, my side hustle, and my personal life. I often found myself staying up late working on my website or replying to clients at midnight. The grind was real, but I loved the challenge. Slowly, my business began to grow. I was gaining clients, and my social media following was steadily increasing. But even then, I knew it wasn't enough. I wanted to scale, but I had no idea how. One day, I had an idea. What if I turned my training program into a subscription-based service? Instead of selling individual plans or coaching, I could create a membership site where people could access new workout routines, meal plans, and exclusive content every month. It sounded like a big leap, but I figured I had nothing to lose. I took out a small loan, hired a web developer to create the membership site, and invested in some marketing. The first month was a disaster. I had only a handful of subscribers, and I was barely breaking even. But I didn't give up. I kept promoting my new service, offering discounts, and reaching out to influencers in the fitness space to collaborate. Slowly, the business began to pick up. By month 3, I was profitable. By month 6, I had 1,000 paying members. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but I had finally found a model that worked. From there, things really started to snowball. I reinvested everything back into the business, hiring a small team to help with content creation, marketing, and customer support. I focused on providing value to my customers, always listening to their feedback and tweaking the program to make it better. I started adding new features, like live workout classes and nutrition coaching, to keep people engaged and attract new members. I also expanded into selling fitness equipment and supplements. By the end of year 2, my business was bringing in 6 figures in revenue. I was still working full-time at the marketing agency, but I knew it was time to make the leap. I quit my job and started working on my business full-time. It was terrifying at first, but it was also the most exciting decision I'd ever made. I had finally taken control of my life. As the business continued to grow, I faced new challenges. Hiring the right people, scaling my marketing efforts, and maintaining a healthy work-life balance were just some of the hurdles I had to overcome. But with every obstacle, I kept pushing forward. I had learned so much in the first few years, and I was finally in a position to make the business exactly what I had dreamed it could be. Fast forward to today, and I'm running a multi-million-dollar company with hundreds of employees. We've expanded beyond fitness, offering wellness products, apparel, and even mental health services. What started as a small side hustle has become a full-fledged empire. But even now, I can't forget where it all started. The late nights, the failed ideas, the rejections, and the countless times I almost gave up. Looking back, I realized that the key to my success wasn't just about working hard. It was about being persistent and adaptable. I didn't always have the answers, but I was willing to learn, fail, and try again. The business wasn't built on a perfect plan, but on constant iteration and growth. If I could give any advice to someone who is just starting out, it would be this: don't expect instant success. It's going to be a long journey with plenty of ups and downs. But if you're willing to put in the work, learn from your mistakes, and stay focused on your vision, you can create something truly incredible. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. I never thought I'd be here, running a successful business and looking back on everything I've been through to get here. But here I am, a little wiser, a little scarred, but stronger than ever. This is the story of how I built my business from nothing, how I faced failure, overcame self-doubt, and ultimately found success. It all started when I was working a dead-end job in a cubicle, drowning in corporate monotony. I hated it. The clock always seemed to move in slow motion, and the worst part was knowing I was contributing to someone else's dream, not my own. Every day felt like I was wasting my time, like there was something bigger I was meant to do. But what? That was the question that haunted me. I had no clear answer, but I knew I had to make a change. The spark came one day when I was scrolling through social media on my lunch break. I came across a post from an entrepreneur who had turned a small idea into a million-dollar business. He was living the life I'd always imagined for myself, traveling, making money while doing what he loved, and having control over his own destiny. I started reading about him, his journey, the risks he took, and the massive failures he had to endure. The more I read, the more I felt the fire inside me. I could do this, I thought. But the reality was I didn't know the first thing about running a business. I had no capital, no business background, and no idea what I was doing. All I had was the burning desire to get out of my 9-to-5 grind and create something of my own. I wasn't about to let that hold me back, though. I started small. I spent months researching businesses, learning about the market, reading books on entrepreneurship, and taking online courses. Every spare moment was spent learning. I talked to people who had been successful in business, picking their brains for advice. But all the knowledge in the world couldn't teach me the one thing I needed most: confidence. I remember the first time I told someone I was going to start a business. It was my best friend, Jake. He looked at me like I had 3 heads and said, You're just a regular guy with a job. Why would anyone buy anything from you?" That stung. It really stung. I tried to brush it off, but deep down, I felt like he was right. Who was I to think I could build something from the ground up? But I refused to quit. The more people doubted me, the more it fueled my determination. I started sketching out ideas and figuring out what kind of business would work for me. Eventually, I settled on an online clothing brand. It was something I was passionate about, and I saw a gap in the market for high-quality, affordable, eco-friendly clothing. It wasn't going to be easy, but I believed it could work. I spent every waking hour designing products, setting up an online store, and creating a brand. I used social media to spread the word and built a small following by offering value, style tips, sustainability facts, and giveaways. I didn't have a marketing budget, so I relied on organic growth and word of mouth. But as my following grew, so did my confidence. Things weren't perfect. In fact, they were far from it. My first few sales were slow. I made mistakes along the way, lots of them. I ordered too much inventory at first, only to find that I couldn't sell it. I misjudged shipping costs, which ate into my profits. I had to learn everything on the fly, and at times, it felt overwhelming. But I didn't give up. It was around this time that I got my first big break. A popular influencer in the fashion space shared one of my shirts on their Instagram. The orders started flooding in. It was like a dream. I couldn't believe it. Suddenly, people were interested in what I was doing. I kept pushing forward, using the momentum to fuel my growth. But even with the surge in sales, I realized I had made another mistake. I didn't have the infrastructure to handle the increase in orders. I wasn't prepared. The next few months were the hardest of my life. I barely slept, answering customer emails at 2 a.m., working with suppliers to get orders out on time, and juggling everything on my own. I realized I couldn't keep up with the demands of running a business and that I needed help. But hiring employees meant more expenses, and I was still working on a shoestring budget. I made the tough decision to bring on a business partner, someone who was as passionate as I was about the brand and had the skills I lacked. We worked day and night to streamline operations, improve our customer service, and scale the business. Slowly but surely, things started to fall into place. We hit our first six-figure revenue month just over a year after launching. It wasn't a fluke. It was the result of relentless work, learning from my mistakes, and keeping my eye on the prize. But the road to success wasn't straight. In fact, it was more like a roller coaster. There were highs, but there were also lows. There were times when I wanted to quit, times when I doubted myself, and times when I thought the whole thing was a waste of time. But I kept pushing forward, kept learning from my mistakes, and kept finding new ways to adapt. Now, looking back on it, I realized that the most important lesson I learned wasn't about business tactics or strategies. It was about resilience. It was about getting knocked down and getting back up again. It was about believing in yourself even when no one else did, and pushing through the hardest days when you feel like everything is falling apart. Because that's when the real growth happens. Today, my business is thriving. We've expanded into new product lines, gained loyal customers, and reached a level of success I never thought possible. But I know it's not just about the money. It's about freedom, the freedom to live life on my own terms, to make my own decisions, and to continue building something meaningful. It's about doing something I love every single day. If you're reading this and thinking about starting your own business, know that it won't be easy. It will challenge you in ways you never imagined. But if you have the drive, the passion, and the willingness to learn from your mistakes, you can make it happen. Don't listen to the doubters. Don't listen to the voice that tells you you're not good enough. If I can do it, so can you. Just keep going. To anyone out there who's thinking of taking the leap, just know this. It's never too late to start, and there's always a way to make it work. Keep hustling, keep grinding, and remember that every setback is a setup for a comeback. You've got this. I still remember the day my entrepreneurial journey truly began. It was a late afternoon in 2018, and I was sitting in my cramped 8x8 office in a co-working space, staring at my computer screen, wondering how I had gotten to this point. A few months earlier, I had been a comfortable 9-to-5 worker at a marketing agency, pulling in a decent salary and living a pretty standard life. I was playing it safe, but deep down, I always felt that the corporate world wasn't for me. I had this burning desire to create something of my own, to build something that would change the game, not just for myself but for others too. What pushed me over the edge was a moment I'll never forget. One afternoon, I had a casual chat with my boss about the future of the company, and his response shook me. He said, "You know, you're really good at your job, but you're just another cog in the machine. Don't get too comfortable. We're all replaceable here." That hit me harder than I ever expected. For the first time in my life, I realized that my future was entirely in someone else's hands, and I didn't like the feeling of it. So, I did what any sane person would do. I quit my job without a backup plan. Yeah, maybe it wasn't the smartest decision, but it was one of the best decisions of my life. I had an idea for a business, something I thought could solve a problem that I personally struggled with for years. You see, I had always been a fitness enthusiast, but finding the right workout gear was a pain. There were tons of options out there, but nothing seemed to tick all the boxes: comfort, quality, durability, and style. So I started thinking, why not create my own line of workout clothes that would meet all these needs? It sounded simple, but starting a business from scratch was anything but. I had no experience in manufacturing, no contacts in the fashion industry, and a very limited budget. What I did have was determination, a strong sense of what my customers would want, and a relentless drive to make it work. I spent the next few months diving headfirst into research. I learned everything I could about fabrics, production processes, design, and branding. I spent hours online reading articles, watching YouTube videos, and even reaching out to people who had experience in the industry. It felt like I was trying to drink from a fire hose, but I was determined to get it right. The next big hurdle was finding a manufacturer. I knew that getting the product quality right would be crucial, so I wasn't willing to cut corners. I started reaching out to manufacturers in different countries, asking for quotes, samples, and advice. It was a lot of back-and-forth communication, and the first few samples I received were disappointing to say the least. The stitching was off, the materials didn't feel right, and some of the designs were just plain ugly. It felt like a never-ending cycle of disappointment. But instead of getting discouraged, I doubled down on my efforts. I sent detailed feedback to the manufacturers, asking for specific changes. Eventually, after months of trial and error, I finally found a factory that could deliver on my vision. It was a game changer. While the product was being produced, I focused on building my brand. I wanted it to be more than just a clothing line. I wanted it to represent a lifestyle. I spent countless hours designing a website, creating a logo, and crafting a brand message that resonated with my target audience, fitness enthusiasts who wanted high-quality gear that could keep up with their active lives. I even started a blog on fitness, sharing tips and personal experiences, hoping to build a community around my brand. When the first batch of clothing arrived, I was both excited and terrified. I had invested a significant chunk of my savings into the venture, and I had no idea if anyone would actually buy my products. I remember sitting in my office, staring at the boxes of clothes, wondering if I had made a huge mistake. But I told myself, you've come this far. There's no turning back now. I launched my website and began promoting it on social media. To my surprise, the orders started rolling in. Slowly at first, but as the weeks went by, more and more people started discovering my brand. I realized that I had created something people actually wanted. It wasn't just about selling clothes. It was about creating a community of like-minded individuals who cared about their fitness journeys and wanted to support a brand that shared their values. But that wasn't the end of the story. In fact, it felt like I was just getting started. As sales grew, so did the challenges. I had to figure out how to manage inventory, handle customer service, and keep up with growing demand. There were moments when I felt overwhelmed and wondered if I had taken on too much. But every time I hit a roadblock, I found a way around it. Over the next couple of years, my business continued to grow. I expanded my product line to include accessories, such as gym bags and water bottles, and even started collaborating with fitness influencers to promote my brand. My social media following grew, and I began getting recognition in the fitness industry. But even with all the success, I never lost sight of why I started in the first place. Fast forward to 2023, and my brand is now a household name in the fitness world. We've expanded internationally, and I've been able to hire a fantastic team that shares my vision and values. We've even started giving back, donating a portion of our profits to fitness-related charities and supporting initiatives that help underprivileged communities access health and wellness resources. I'm proud of how far we've come, but I know that the journey is far from over. I've learned so much along the way, about business, about myself, and about the importance of perseverance. There have been many moments of doubt, plenty of failures, and a ton of hard work. But every setback was a lesson, and every small win was a reminder that I was on the right path. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come from that small office with the computer screen staring back at me. It wasn't easy, but it was worth every single second. If you're thinking about starting your own business, all I can say is this: don't let fear hold you back. Take the leap, learn from your mistakes, and keep pushing forward. The road to success isn't always straight, but with enough grit and determination, you'll get there. This journey hasn't been just about building a business. It's been about discovering who I am and what I'm capable of. I didn't just create a brand. I created a life that I'm proud of, and that's something no job or boss can ever take away from me. This is the story of how I built my tech startup from nothing to a multi-million-dollar business, while battling self-doubt, financial struggles, and an ever-changing landscape of competitors. I've always had a passion for technology. As a kid, I would spend hours tinkering with old computers, trying to understand how they worked. But my path to entrepreneurship wasn't straightforward. I didn't have a fancy degree from a top-tier university or connections with powerful people in the tech world. I grew up in a small town where the idea of building a company seemed almost impossible. But I had something that mattered more: a relentless drive to make it happen. After high school, I took the practical route and went to a local community college. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I knew I loved tech. So, I decided to pursue a degree in computer science, which seemed like the safe bet. While I was learning the ins and outs of programming, I got a part-time job at a local tech repair shop. It was humble work, but it paid the bills and gave me the chance to learn more about hardware, software, and the business side of the tech industry. The turning point came during my second year of college. I had been using a particular software for a project, and I realized it was missing a key feature that could make a huge difference for small businesses. I started sketching out my ideas and eventually developed a rough prototype of a software that could automate certain tasks for small businesses. I had no formal business training, but I believed in the idea. At first, I kept the project a secret. I didn't want to get my hopes up in case it didn't work out, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this idea had potential. So, I decided to take the leap and launched a small beta version of the software. I put it on a few forums and reached out to small business owners who might benefit from it. To my surprise, people started showing interest. They were eager to try it out, and some even offered feedback that helped me refine the product. However, things weren't as smooth as they seemed. The feedback was great, but the reality of running a business started to sink in. My finances were tight, and I had no clue how to market the software or attract investors. I spent countless nights working on the software, trying to fix bugs, adding new features, and learning about the business side of things. I knew I had a good product, but I wasn't sure how to turn it into a profitable business. I joined a few online communities for tech entrepreneurs and started learning from people who had been through the same struggles. They told me about the importance of finding a co-founder who could help balance the workload and bring new ideas to the table. It was a great piece of advice, but the idea of finding someone who was as committed to the project as I was seemed daunting. One night, I stumbled across a post on a startup forum from a guy named Alex. He was also a software developer, and he was working on a project that sounded similar to mine. We exchanged messages and decided to meet up. When we sat down to discuss our ideas, it felt like we had known each other for years. We clicked instantly, and after a few hours of brainstorming, we agreed to team up. Alex brought a lot to the table. He had more experience in business strategy, and he was much better at handling the financial side of things than I was. Together, we started working on the software full-time. We refined the product, created a website, and launched a new version with a more polished design. We also started reaching out to potential customers and offering them a free trial. Slowly but surely, the user base began to grow. But growth wasn't without its challenges. We ran into several roadblocks, from technical difficulties with scaling the software to difficulties managing customer service. As our user base grew, so did the pressure. I often felt like I was drowning in emails, bug reports, and feedback. It was easy to lose sight of the bigger picture when you were constantly dealing with the day-to-day chaos of running a business. The tipping point came when we landed our first big client. It wasn't a massive company, but it was a small but successful firm that was willing to pay for our software and give us the chance to prove ourselves. This was the break we needed. The client was happy with the software, and they even recommended us to a few of their business partners. We suddenly found ourselves with more clients than we could handle. The influx of business was both exhilarating and terrifying. We had to hire more people, improve our infrastructure, and stay on top of product development. At the same time, our competitors were starting to catch up. They saw what we were doing and started offering similar services. Some of them had deeper pockets and more resources, and I'll admit, there were times when I thought we might not make it. It was hard to stay motivated when it felt like we were constantly fighting an uphill battle. But Alex and I didn't give up. We kept pushing forward, tweaking the product, improving customer support, and constantly looking for ways to differentiate ourselves from the competition. We also made sure to keep our users at the forefront of our minds, listening to their feedback and implementing their suggestions. Over time, we began to carve out our own niche in the market. Our software wasn't perfect, but it was reliable, affordable, and easy to use. We focused on providing exceptional customer service, and word of mouth began to spread. After 2 years of hard work, our company finally reached the point where we could afford to hire a full team. We brought in a marketing expert, a few developers, and a customer success manager to help us scale. The growth was exponential from there. We moved into a proper office, and our revenue began to skyrocket. We secured venture capital funding, which gave us the resources to expand even faster. And with that, the dream that had started as a small idea in my college dorm became a reality. Looking back, the journey was anything but easy. There were countless sleepless nights, self-doubt, and moments where I thought about giving up. But every setback taught me something valuable, and I learned to embrace the failures as much as the successes. Now, our software is used by thousands of small businesses around the world, and we're constantly innovating to stay ahead of the curve. Starting a company from scratch isn't for the faint of heart. It requires determination, resilience, and a willingness to learn from every mistake. But if you truly believe in what you're doing, you'll find a way to make it work. I did, and I'm living proof that you don't need a fancy pedigree to succeed as an entrepreneur. Just an idea, a little bit of grit, and the willingness to never give up. I had always been told that success didn't come easy, but I never quite understood what that meant until I found myself at the lowest point in my life. Let me take you back to where it all began. I had always been the kid with big ideas. Growing up in a modest home, my parents didn't have much, but they made sure we had everything we needed. I remember sitting around the dinner table with my younger sister, dreaming of the future. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew I wasn't going to work a 9-to-5 job for the rest of my life. There was something in me that told me I had to do something different, something bigger than what was expected of me. After high school, I decided to go to college to study business. I didn't have much money, so I worked part-time jobs to pay for tuition. The hours were long, and there were days when I felt exhausted and overwhelmed, but I kept going. I was determined to prove that I could make it. During my sophomore year, I started to dabble in the world of startups. I had this wild idea to create a tech platform that would connect local businesses with customers through a seamless app experience. At the time, it sounded groundbreaking. I spent the next few years obsessing over this idea. I'd pitch it to anyone who would listen, friends, professors, even strangers. But every time I got a response, it was either lukewarm or downright dismissive. There's no way you can compete with the big guys, I was told. Why would anyone want to use your app when there are already platforms out there? I had every reason to quit, but something inside me pushed me to keep going. I knew the road wouldn't be easy, but I wasn't ready to throw in the towel just yet. I scraped together enough money to hire a small development team to build the first version of my app. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. I spent nights debugging, tweaking, and constantly refining the platform. It was a slow, painful process. Each setback felt like a punch in the gut, but I refused to give up. I told myself that failure was just a lesson I hadn't learned yet. Then came the moment that changed everything. I had just finished a pitch to a potential investor. I had polished my presentation, I knew my numbers, and I had every answer ready to go. But as I finished, the investor gave me a look that I couldn't quite interpret. "You have a great idea," he said, "but it's just not there yet. You need to show me that you're serious. This isn't a hobby." I was devastated. For weeks, I questioned my choices. Maybe he was right. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this. I considered quitting and finding a stable job, a career that would give me a steady paycheck. But as much as I tried to convince myself that I should quit, there was this nagging voice in my head that told me not to. It reminded me of all the long nights I spent working on my app, of the sacrifices I had made to get to this point. So, I decided to go all in. I dropped out of college. It wasn't an easy decision. My parents were furious, and I felt like I was letting everyone down. But deep down, I knew I had to take the leap. I threw myself into my startup full-time. I raised some money from family and friends, and I secured a few smaller investors. With their support, I was able to hire more developers and build out the platform further. Things didn't magically turn around. In fact, it got worse before it got better. The app crashed during our first public launch. Customers were frustrated, and the media started calling it a flop. We spent the next several months fixing bugs, improving the user interface, and trying to find ways to stand out in a crowded market. It was exhausting. Some nights, I felt like I was on the verge of collapse, both mentally and physically. But then, something clicked. I stopped trying to compete with the bigger companies. Instead of focusing on what they were doing, I decided to double down on what made my platform unique. I realized that my app wasn't just a tool for businesses, it was a way to build a community. I revamped the platform's features to focus on local connections, fostering relationships between businesses and customers in a way that hadn't been done before. I introduced a loyalty program, personalized recommendations, and a reward system that encouraged users to engage with local businesses. It wasn't an overnight success, but slowly, things started to change. More users began signing up, and more businesses joined the platform. The community aspect of the app resonated with people, and word spread. The revenue started to grow, and we secured more funding to expand our team. But even as things began to improve, I faced a new challenge. As my startup grew, so did the pressure. I had to learn how to manage a team, how to handle PR, how to scale a business. There were moments when I felt like I was in way over my head. At times, I was so overwhelmed that I doubted I had the skills to run a company. But I kept pushing forward, knowing that if I stopped now, I would lose everything I had worked for. One of the biggest lessons I learned was the importance of finding the right people. I was so focused on building the product that I neglected the team that was helping me build it. When I finally took the time to hire people who shared my vision, things started to fall into place. Having a team that was passionate and dedicated made all the difference. Together, we celebrated the small wins and learned from our mistakes. Today, my company is a leader in the local business platform space. We've expanded to several major cities, and the app continues to grow in popularity. I'm no longer just a dreamer with big ideas. I'm a CEO of a thriving business. But even with all the success, I never forget where I came from. Every time I sit down with my team or meet with investors, I think back to those long nights when I was working alone in my apartment, unsure of what the future held. I still face challenges every day. I still have moments when I doubt myself, but I've learned to embrace those moments. They remind me that I'm pushing myself to grow, to become better, and to keep moving forward. There's no shortcut to success, and it certainly doesn't come easy. But if you're willing to put in the work, to learn from your failures, and to keep going when it feels impossible, you can make it. Looking back, I'm proud of the journey. It wasn't a straight path, and there were plenty of obstacles along the way. But it was my path, and I wouldn't change a thing. I'm proof that if you believe in yourself and refuse to give up, you can turn even the wildest dreams into reality. I never thought I'd be here, sharing this story. In fact, the whole idea of becoming an entrepreneur seemed ridiculous to me when I first started. I grew up in a small town where the biggest businesses were the local hardware store and a family-run diner. The idea of running something of my own wasn't even on my radar until I found myself broke, unemployed, and absolutely miserable. It all started when I lost my job. I was working as an office manager for a mid-sized company. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and I was decent at it. The company went through a restructuring, and like so many others, I found myself caught in the crossfire. The pink slip came without warning. One minute I was signing off on spreadsheets, the next, I was cleaning out my desk, wondering what the hell I was going to do next. I had no savings, a few debts, and the only thing I could rely on was a decent credit score, but even that wasn't a great foundation for a fresh start. For months, I scrambled. I applied for job after job, sending out resumes like they were invitations to a party no one wanted to attend. I even tried freelancing as a virtual assistant, but it wasn't enough to make ends meet. I was living on cheap ramen and barely affording the rent, but the most frustrating part wasn't the lack of money, it was the lack of direction. I had no idea what I was doing. But then, one day, while scrolling through social media, I stumbled upon a story of a guy who turned his passion for woodworking into a full-time business. He was making money selling custom furniture online. The idea stuck with me. I've always had a bit of a knack for building things. My dad had taught me how to use tools when I was young, and though I wasn't a professional carpenter, I had made a few things for friends and family over the years. It wasn't anything special, just basic furniture like tables and shelves, but the thought of turning it into a business seemed intriguing. So, on a whim, I decided to give it a shot. I didn't have any startup money. I didn't even have a proper workshop, but I had a small garage and a collection of tools I inherited from my dad. I figured if this was going to work, I'd have to get creative. The first thing I did was buy some affordable wood from a local supplier, and with a few free hours every evening, I started making small projects. I focused on simple, clean designs, coffee tables, small shelves, and rustic home decor pieces. It was nothing groundbreaking, but I thought I could sell them online through Etsy or Facebook Marketplace. I set up a basic website, using a cheap domain and free website builder, and started listing my products. But the first few weeks were rough. I didn't get a single sale. I started questioning whether this was just another pipe dream that would end in disappointment. But something kept me going. Maybe it was the small voice inside me that said, "What else do you have to lose?" Or maybe it was the fleeting sense of pride I felt when I finished a piece and took a photo of it. Whatever it was, I refused to give up. Then, a breakthrough. I got my first order, a small bookshelf. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make me feel like I might be onto something. The customer was a young woman who had seen my work on Facebook Marketplace. She loved it, and when I delivered the piece, she even posted a photo of it online, tagging me in the process. That was the moment everything changed. From there, things started to snowball. Word-of-mouth referrals led to more orders, and I began gaining a small following on social media. I still didn't have a real workshop, so I worked out of my garage, which quickly became cramped with unfinished pieces. I invested in a few more tools, a table saw, a planer, and a better drill, anything that would make my work faster and more precise. I also started experimenting with different types of wood, stains, and finishes, trying to find a niche that people would love. The real turning point came when I made a custom dining table for a couple who had been following my page for a while. It was large, heavy, and took me weeks to finish, but when they saw it, their reaction was priceless. The couple ended up not only buying the table but also recommending me to all their friends. Within a few months, I was getting custom orders left and right. It felt like a dream. As the business grew, so did the challenges. I had to figure out how to manage orders, track inventory, and handle customer service. I was still running the operation alone, and there were days when I barely had time to eat or sleep. But I was too passionate about what I was doing to give up. I also started investing more in advertising, Facebook ads, Instagram influencers, anything to get the word out. I even started collaborating with other local artisans to sell my work at craft fairs, which introduced me to a whole new customer base. But the real game changer was when I decided to go beyond furniture. I started offering custom wood home decor, things like personalized cutting boards, coat racks, and even small wood sculptures. People loved the idea of having something unique made just for them. I made a few partnerships with local interior designers, which helped me break into high-end markets. Eventually, I moved out of my garage and rented a small workshop, which allowed me to take on more orders and hire a couple of part-time employees. In the span of 2 years, I went from scraping by, trying to figure out how to pay my rent, to running a small but successful business. I went from working with scraps of wood and basic tools to having a full-fledged operation with a steady stream of customers and a solid online presence. I even started offering a line of furniture that catered to eco-conscious buyers, using reclaimed wood and sustainable materials. Looking back, it's crazy to think how far I've come. I've learned so much about the business side of things, how to manage a budget, how to market effectively, and how to keep customers happy. I've also learned that success doesn't come overnight. There were plenty of sleepless nights and moments when I doubted myself. But what I've realized is that perseverance and passion really do make all the difference. If you have an idea, a skill, and the drive to make it work, anything is possible. Today, I'm still running my business, and while it's not easy, it's incredibly fulfilling. I've been able to hire a full team, and we now ship custom furniture all over the country. I'm proud of what I've built and the people I've worked with along the way. But more than anything, I'm grateful that I took that leap of faith when I was at my lowest. If I can make it, anyone can. It was 2015, and I had just quit my job at a corporate law firm. I was miserable, to be honest. The long hours, the constant stress, the endless pile of paperwork, it was draining me both mentally and physically. I had always wanted to start my own business, but I never had the guts to take the plunge. And yet, something about that point in my life pushed me to do it. I had no clear plan, no safety net, just a vague idea that I could do something better. At first, I thought about opening a small coffee shop. I loved coffee. I loved the idea of creating a cozy place where people could unwind, talk, and enjoy good drinks. But when I started researching the logistics, it hit me. Renting a space, hiring staff, buying equipment, it would require a lot of upfront capital. I didn't have the kind of savings that would make that kind of leap feasible. So I pivoted. I thought about online businesses. Dropshipping seemed to be all the rage, and I figured it could be a good way to get started without needing much capital. I spent weeks researching suppliers, setting up my website, and figuring out how to run ads on Facebook and Instagram. I launched my first store selling trendy phone accessories, convinced that people would buy from me just because I had a slick website. Spoiler alert, they didn't. I burned through most of my savings trying to run ads, and my conversion rates were abysmally low. I couldn't figure out why. My products looked great, the website was polished, and I was following all the strategies the gurus said would work. But the orders never came. I felt defeated. I didn't have the luxury of burning more cash on a failing business model. That's when I had a conversation with my friend Josh, who had been running a successful e-commerce store selling fitness gear. Josh was the type of guy who could turn anything into gold, so I figured I could get some good advice from him. I told him about my struggles with dropshipping, and he asked me a simple question. Are you actually solving a problem for your customers? That question hit me like a ton of bricks. Up until that point, I hadn't been thinking about solving a problem at all. I was just chasing trends and hoping people would buy stuff because it looked cool. But Josh was right. I hadn't identified a real need. I hadn't thought about what people truly wanted or needed. I took a step back and started thinking about problems I faced in my own life. What was something I would pay for that would make my life easier? That's when it clicked. I had been struggling with back pain for years, mostly from sitting in a chair for long hours at my job. I tried various solutions, pillows, stretching routines, massages, but nothing really worked. That's when I thought, what if I created a business around ergonomic products designed to make sitting for long hours more comfortable? I started researching ergonomic chairs, cushions, and accessories. I dove deep into the science behind good posture and how it affected long-term health. I realized that there was a real market for people who spent a lot of time sitting, whether it was at desks, in cars, or on planes, and who needed practical solutions to improve their comfort and well-being. I decided to start small. I focused on one product, a high-quality memory foam seat cushion designed to relieve back pain, and I launched my new website with a simple store. This time, instead of just throwing money at Facebook ads, I took a different approach. I spent weeks researching my target audience, figuring out where they spent time online, and crafting tailored ads. I also made sure my website was optimized for conversions. I learned about copywriting, A/B testing, and how to get visitors to trust my store. This time, things started clicking. My first few sales came in, and I couldn't believe it. I was actually making money, but I didn't get complacent. I knew this was just the beginning, and I had a lot more work to do to grow the business. I reinvested every dollar back into marketing, testing new ad strategies, and expanding my product line. Over the next year, my sales grew steadily. I added more ergonomic products to my store, including footrests, lumbar support cushions, and even adjustable standing desks. Every time I launched a new product, I saw an uptick in sales, and customers started leaving positive reviews. I took customer feedback seriously, and I made sure to improve my offerings based on their suggestions. But as the business grew, so did the challenges. I had to hire a team, set up logistics for inventory management, and learn how to scale effectively. One of the hardest lessons I had to learn was that growth isn't always linear. For every breakthrough, there were setbacks, shipping delays, customer complaints, supplier issues, and the constant pressure to stay ahead of the competition. There were moments when I questioned whether I had made the right choice. But each time I felt like giving up, I reminded myself that I had come too far to turn back now. The turning point came when I decided to invest in SEO. I had been relying heavily on paid ads, but I knew that would only take me so far. I hired an SEO expert, and together, we worked on improving the content on my website, building backlinks, and optimizing my product pages. Slowly but surely, my organic traffic started to grow. That was the moment I realized that I had built a sustainable business, not just a one-time success. Now, as I look back on the journey, I can hardly believe how far I've come. What started as a tiny idea in my apartment has now turned into a thriving business that generates millions in revenue each year. I've been able to hire a fantastic team, and we've expanded our product offerings to include everything from ergonomic office furniture to wellness products designed to improve overall health. I'm not going to pretend it's been easy. The road to success was filled with failures, setbacks, and tough lessons. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that entrepreneurship isn't about having the perfect idea from the start. It's about solving a real problem, learning from your mistakes, and never giving up. Now, I'm living the life I've always dreamed of, traveling the world, building a business I'm proud of, and helping thousands of people improve their health and comfort. If you're out there wondering if it's worth taking the leap, my answer is yes. It's never too late to start, and every failure is just a stepping stone to success. Keep going, even when things get tough. You never know where you'll end up. I had no idea what I was getting myself into when I first decided to start my own business. I was 26, living in a small apartment, working a dead-end job as a software engineer, and feeling like I was stuck in a rut. Every morning, I'd wake up, go to work, come home, and repeat. It was the definition of monotony, and I hated it. My friends and family would tell me, just stick it out. You're making a good salary. But deep down, I knew there had to be more to life than this. It all started one night after work when I was scrolling through Instagram and saw an ad for a dropshipping course. At first, I laughed it off. That's just another scam to take people's money, I thought. But as the days passed, the idea started to linger. I started watching YouTube videos and reading articles about dropshipping, e-commerce, and building online businesses. It seemed like the perfect opportunity to break free from the corporate grind, and I thought, what do I have to lose? Worst case, I'll learn something new. So, I spent the next few weeks learning everything I could about starting a business. I took an online course, read dozens of books, joined Facebook groups, and watched countless YouTube videos. It wasn't glamorous, but I was determined. After a while, I finally felt like I knew enough to take the plunge. I registered a domain, set up a Shopify store, and started sourcing products from suppliers. The first few months were rough. I barely made any sales, and the little money I'd make barely covered my ad spend. It felt like every time I took one step forward, I took 2 steps back. I was spending hours learning how to run Facebook ads, experimenting with different strategies, and trying to optimize my website. But despite all my hard work, nothing seemed to work. I remember one night, after a particularly frustrating week, I was sitting at my desk staring at my Shopify dashboard. The sales numbers were dismal. I had $10 in my bank account, and I still hadn't paid for the course I'd taken months ago. I was exhausted, and I almost gave up. But then I remembered why I started this in the first place. I didn't want to be stuck in a cubicle for the rest of my life. I didn't want to spend my days working for someone else's dream. I wanted to build something for myself, no matter how hard it was. So, I decided to change things up. I started focusing on creating better content and building an email list. Instead of just relying on Facebook ads, I invested time in creating valuable blog posts, running giveaways, and engaging with my audience on social media. Slowly but surely, things started to click. My sales began to grow, and I saw my customer base expand. It wasn't a huge jump, but it was progress. And for the first time, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. Fast forward a year, and things had completely changed. I had grown my dropshipping business into a 6-figure operation. I was working from home, had a flexible schedule, and finally felt like I was in control of my own destiny. The best part? I had managed to scale my business without ever needing to take out a loan or borrow money from anyone. It was all my own effort, late nights, and countless hours of learning. But despite the success, I still felt unfulfilled. Something was missing. That's when I realized I was ready to take the next step, turning my dropshipping store into a brand. I had built up a loyal following, and I had learned a ton about marketing, operations, and e-commerce. I started to invest in high-quality products, refine my website, and focus on creating an authentic brand that resonated with my customers. It wasn't just about making money anymore. It was about creating something people cared about. The transition wasn't easy. It required significant changes to my business model, more investment, and a shift in mindset. But as I saw my customers engaging more and buying my higher-ticket products, I knew I was on the right path. I finally had a product line I could be proud of and a brand I felt passionate about. My sales grew even further, and I eventually started hiring a small team to help with customer service, marketing, and operations. Looking back, I still can't believe how far I've come. From a broke software engineer who didn't know the first thing about business to owning a brand that's now generating millions in annual revenue, it's been a crazy ride. But the lessons I learned along the way have been invaluable. I've learned that success isn't just about working hard. It's about working smart, being adaptable, and not being afraid to fail. Along the way, I've also learned that entrepreneurship is more than just making money. It's about creating something meaningful, providing value to others, and finding fulfillment in the work you do. There are days when I miss the simplicity of my old job, the steady paycheck, the lack of responsibility, but those days are few and far between. Now, I wake up every morning excited to work on my business, knowing that I'm building something that's mine and that I'm in control of my future. For anyone out there thinking about starting their own business, here's my advice. Don't expect it to be easy. Don't expect overnight success. But also don't give up. If you're willing to learn, adapt, and persevere, you can build something incredible. Just take it one day at a time, and remember that every setback is just an opportunity to learn and grow. It's not about how fast you go, it's about how badly you want it and how much you're willing to put into it. And finally, never forget why you started. It's easy to get lost in the hustle, but always remind yourself of the bigger picture. Stay grounded, stay focused, and never stop pushing forward. To anyone out there looking to make that leap, trust me, you can do it. Just keep going, even when it feels impossible. The reward is worth it. Hey, friends, If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. I never thought I'd be an entrepreneur. In fact, the idea of running a business used to terrify me. But one fateful decision, one moment of desperation, changed everything. It all started in my mid-20s. I had a decent job at a tech company, working as a data analyst. I wasn't living the dream, but I was comfortable. I had a nice apartment, enough to eat, and a steady income. But something was missing. I felt unfulfilled, like I was just going through the motions of life, doing what was expected rather than pursuing anything that really excited me. One Friday afternoon, I sat in the office, looking at my computer screen, barely keeping my eyes open. The clock slowly ticked down to 5 p.m., and I realized that my entire week had felt like a blur. I wasn't proud of the work I was doing. I wasn't passionate about it. It was just data. I was just another cog in the machine. That's when I made the decision. I decided to quit my job. No safety net. No backup plan. Just a vague idea that I could do something better for myself, something that would ignite a spark inside me. At that time, I wasn't sure what something better would look like, but I was determined to find it. Quitting my job was the first step. What followed was a year of uncertainty, experimentation, and, to be honest, failure. I didn't have a clear idea of what I wanted to do next, and I certainly didn't have any entrepreneurial experience. So, like most people in my position, I started doing research. I spent countless hours reading articles, watching YouTube videos, and talking to anyone I could find who had successfully built a business. It was overwhelming, to say the least. There were so many different directions I could go: e-commerce, dropshipping, digital marketing, software development. The list went on. Every time I thought I'd found a niche I was passionate about, something would throw me off course. One day, I stumbled across a community of people who were building small online businesses. They were a mix of freelancers, coaches, consultants, and small e-commerce store owners. I was intrigued, but the more I read, the more I realized that I wasn't alone in feeling lost or uncertain. Everyone in the group had been through their own struggles, and they were all figuring it out as they went along. One person's story stood out to me. She had started an online store selling niche products, but she was struggling to get traffic to her site. She tried every marketing strategy she could think of, but nothing was working. Then, she had a breakthrough. Instead of trying to sell to everyone, she focused on a very specific target market, people who shared a very niche interest. She built a community around that interest and used content marketing to draw people in. That's when things took off. I remember thinking, that's it. That's my idea. I didn't have the budget to start an elaborate e-commerce business, and I didn't want to rely on paid ads to get traffic. But I could build a community. I could focus on a niche market. And that's exactly what I did. I spent the next few months building a blog around a very specific hobby that I was passionate about: urban gardening. It was a weird niche, but I knew there were a lot of people out there who shared my interest. I wrote articles, created videos, and shared tips and tricks for growing plants in small spaces. At first, it felt like I was shouting into the void. No one was reading my posts, and I had zero traffic. But I kept pushing forward. To grow my audience, I started interacting with other urban gardeners on social media, offering advice and sharing my content. Slowly but surely, I began to see a small community form. People started leaving comments on my blog, sharing my posts with their friends, and tagging me in their own gardening photos. It was a small but passionate group, and I felt like I had finally found my place. One day, after a few months of consistent content creation, I received an email from someone who wanted to buy a product I had recommended in one of my blog posts. I was floored. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I hadn't even set up any sort of e-commerce infrastructure. But it turned out that this person was willing to pay for a product through my blog, just because they trusted my recommendations. That email was a game changer. I realized that I had built something people cared about. I had a small but engaged audience, and I could start monetizing it. From that point on, I started adding affiliate links to my blog, partnering with brands that aligned with my values, and creating digital products like gardening ebooks. My income grew slowly but steadily. There were plenty of ups and downs. Some months were better than others, and I had a lot of self-doubt. But I continued to focus on creating high-quality content and building relationships with my audience. I knew that trust was everything, and if I could consistently provide value, the business would grow. Fast forward to today, and my online gardening business is thriving. I no longer have to worry about paying rent or dealing with office politics. I work from home, set my own schedule, and have complete control over my career. I've expanded into creating online courses, doing paid sponsorships, and even launching a line of gardening tools that I personally designed. It wasn't easy. There were countless nights where I wondered if I had made a huge mistake by quitting my job. There were months where I made barely enough to cover my expenses. But looking back, I'm so grateful I took the leap. Being an entrepreneur has allowed me to live a life that's aligned with my values, and it's given me the freedom to pursue the things I'm passionate about. The journey hasn't been linear. There were moments when I felt like giving up, but every failure, every setback, taught me something valuable. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that success doesn't happen overnight. It's the result of consistent effort, learning from mistakes, and being willing to adapt. So, if you're reading this and thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple: start. Don't wait for the perfect idea or the perfect moment. Just start somewhere, even if it's small. And remember, the road will be tough, but if you keep going, you'll get there. And to anyone still stuck in a job they hate, take the leap. It's terrifying, I won't lie, but there's a whole world of opportunities out there waiting for you. Don't let fear hold you back. Take that first step, even if it's a small one, and see where it leads. The only way to know if you can succeed is to try. I was a 23-year-old fresh graduate with a degree in marketing, full of energy and grand ideas, but broke as a joke. I had just moved back in with my parents in a small town, and while I was technically still figuring things out, my bank account told a different story. A few months of unemployment and a mounting stack of bills got me to a point where I knew I had to make a choice: stay stuck or take a risk. It all started one late evening in my room, scrolling through social media like I always did when I needed a distraction. My newsfeed was flooded with ads, but one in particular caught my eye. It was an ad for a dropshipping course. I'd seen similar ads before, but this one was different. It promised to turn average people into successful entrepreneurs with zero experience and little money. I was skeptical, of course, but the idea of being my own boss was appealing. After several weeks of contemplating and Googling, I took the plunge and bought the course. I was using every bit of my savings for it, and if this didn't work, I'd be back to square one. The course wasn't cheap, but it had glowing reviews. The first few days felt overwhelming. There were videos, spreadsheets, and tasks to complete. It was like learning an entirely new language. I spent sleepless nights reading articles, watching videos, and implementing every tip I could find on the internet. The frustration, mixed with excitement, was almost unbearable. After the first month, I had my first store up and running. It was a basic website with a minimalist design and a few products that I thought would sell well. Nothing too fancy, just a few random items like phone accessories and some generic fitness gear. I set up Facebook ads, pushed out some Instagram posts, and waited. And waited. And waited some more. I didn't know what I was doing. I threw $100 into ads, expecting to make at least some money back. But no, it was a total bust. It felt like a punch to the gut. The feeling of disappointment lingered for days. The $100 I spent on ads was gone. I could hear my mom's voice in my head, asking me if I was sure about this whole business thing. The worst part? I had no clue what went wrong. But there was a tiny spark in me that said, don't quit. So, I didn't. I started analyzing my ads, diving deep into my audience insights, and tweaking things here and there. Slowly but surely, I learned the importance of targeting the right people. I also realized that the product mattered a lot more than I had originally thought. If you're selling a random, low-quality item, the chances of someone actually buying it are slim. But if you sell something that genuinely solves a problem or adds value, that's where the magic happens. I switched gears, rebranded my store, and launched a new product, a unique, high-quality ergonomic desk chair. I spent weeks researching the best suppliers, contacting manufacturers, and negotiating prices. I learned everything I could about the chair industry. Then I revamped my website to make it more professional. By the time I was ready to launch, I felt like I actually had a product that could stand out. But here's the kicker. When I finally launched my new product and set up my ads, nothing happened. Again, I wasn't about to give up, though. I kept learning. I joined online forums, attended webinars, and even paid for a mentor who specialized in Facebook ads. It was humbling, to say the least. There was a lot of trial and error, but that's where I learned the hard lesson that the key to success in business is perseverance, not giving up when things look bleak. And then, one night, After days of testing different ad creatives and adjusting my budget, I saw the numbers. I'd made my first sale. It was only $50, but it was real. My heart raced. It wasn't much, but it was a sign that things could work. I didn't stop there. I reinvested that money into more ads, and slowly, my store started getting more traction. Within 3 months, I was making a consistent $1,000 per month in profit. It wasn't life-changing money, but for a 23-year-old who had just graduated and had been struggling to pay bills, it felt like a breakthrough. It was the first time I felt like I had control over my financial future. I kept scaling, testing new products, and improving my ad strategies. I realized that the key to growing any business is continuous learning and adaptability. The competition in dropshipping was fierce, and if I didn't innovate, I'd be left behind. I diversified my product offerings and even started creating my own branded items. The next 6 months were a blur of growing sales and constant hustle. I woke up early, worked late, and barely took a day off. My friends would invite me out, but I would decline, saying I had work to do. And I did. There was always something to improve, always another tweak to make. By the end of the year, my business was grossing $10,000 per month in revenue. I couldn't believe it. I had gone from barely scraping by to running a profitable business. It was surreal. My parents, who were initially doubtful, started to see the results. They even started asking me for advice on some of their small business ideas. I remember my mom saying, "I never thought you'd actually pull this off, but I'm proud of you." The next 2 years were a whirlwind of success and failure. I expanded my product line, hired a few virtual assistants, and even started experimenting with other forms of e-commerce. I learned about email marketing, content creation, and the importance of building a brand rather than just selling a product. The more I learned, the more I realized that running a successful business isn't just about making money, it's about solving problems for people. Eventually, I sold my dropshipping store for a substantial sum, and that's when the real freedom kicked in. I could afford to invest in other businesses, live comfortably, and pursue other ventures I had once only dreamed of. I built a brand new store from scratch, this time focusing on sustainable products. I wanted to give back in some way, and this new venture allowed me to feel like I was doing something meaningful. Now, I'm in a position where I'm financially independent and able to help others build their own businesses. I've mentored several young entrepreneurs, helping them avoid the mistakes I made when I first started. I try to stress the importance of persistence, learning from failures, and adapting to change. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. It feels like a lifetime ago that I was sitting in my room, feeling lost and unsure about my future. But every failure, every sleepless night, and every small win brought me to where I am today. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that success doesn't happen overnight. It's the result of countless hours of hard work, learning from mistakes, and, above all, never giving up. If you're reading this and feeling like I did at 23, just know that it's possible. You can make something of yourself, but it won't be easy. If you're willing to put in the work and learn from your mistakes, you'll get there. It's not just about starting a business, it's about staying in the game long enough to succeed. So, if you're just starting out, don't get discouraged. The road is tough, but it's worth it. Keep pushing, keep learning, and one day, you'll look back and see how far you've come. A couple of years ago, I hit rock bottom. I was living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to make ends meet, and my dreams of becoming a successful entrepreneur seemed completely out of reach. But now, as I sit in my spacious office, with a thriving business under my belt, I often think about how close I was to giving up, how easily I could have stayed in that miserable place. This is the story of how I went from broke and unemployed to owning a multi-million-dollar startup. It wasn't easy, but the journey was worth every sleepless night. It all started back in 2018. I had just been let go from my corporate job, which I'd held for 4 years. The company was downsizing, and I was one of the casualties. I hadn't been prepared for it at all. I thought I had job security, a steady paycheck, benefits, and a clear career path ahead of me. But suddenly, I was out of work and staring at a pile of bills that seemed to grow taller every day. I tried to stay positive. I updated my resume, scoured job boards, and sent out dozens of applications. But for weeks, nothing happened. Rejection after rejection left me feeling more and more discouraged. I started questioning my abilities. Was I not good enough? Why wasn't anyone hiring? It didn't help that every time I looked at my bank account, I was reminded of how fast my savings were dwindling. I was in a dark place mentally and emotionally. One night, after yet another fruitless day of job hunting, I was sitting in my small, dimly lit apartment, scrolling through social media to distract myself. That's when I stumbled upon a post from an old college friend. He had started a business, something small at first, but now it was growing rapidly. His post showed a picture of him and his team in a shiny new office with the caption, "Grateful for the hustle. The grind is real." That post hit me like a lightning bolt. I had always been the safe type, playing it safe in a corporate job where I knew what to expect. But looking at my friend's success, something clicked inside me. Maybe I didn't need to find another job. Maybe I needed to create my own job. Maybe I could build something from the ground up, just like he had. The idea of entrepreneurship started to consume me. The next day, I went all in. I didn't have much money left, but I had a lot of time on my hands. I started researching, reading books and articles about business, watching videos, listening to podcasts. I wanted to learn everything I could about starting a company. I didn't know exactly what business I wanted to build, but I knew I had to take action. I couldn't afford to sit around waiting for opportunities to come to me anymore. After a week of intense research, I decided to start a business in an area I had experience in, digital marketing. I had spent a few years working in marketing before losing my job, and I realized that this was an industry that was only going to grow. I could offer services to small businesses that couldn't afford large marketing firms, providing them with the same expertise at a fraction of the cost. The idea was simple but compelling. I spent the next month setting up my business. I created a website, put together a portfolio with some mock-up projects, and started reaching out to small business owners. At first, the responses were slow. It was disheartening. I had spent so much time and energy setting everything up, but I wasn't seeing the results I hoped for. But I refused to quit. One day, I received an email from a local bakery. They had been struggling with their online presence and wanted help improving their social media strategy. I jumped at the opportunity. It wasn't much, but it was something. I got to work, revamping their social media, creating engaging content, and running ads. Within a month, their sales had increased by 30%. The owner was thrilled and asked if I could work with other businesses in the area. I had my first success. That small win sparked a chain reaction. Word-of-mouth recommendations spread, and soon I had a few more clients. I was still working from my apartment, juggling client calls, and trying to maintain some semblance of work-life balance. But I was making money, and that was all that mattered. Slowly but surely, I started to scale. I brought on a freelance designer and a content writer to help me with projects. I reinvested everything I earned back into the business, better tools, marketing, and more training for myself. By the end of the first year, my revenue had doubled. I was no longer scraping by. I could pay myself a decent salary, hire more people, and even move into a proper office. I was living the dream I had always wanted, but the journey was far from over. As my business grew, so did the challenges. I had to learn how to manage a team, deal with difficult clients, and handle the stress that comes with being the head of a company. There were days when I wondered if I had bitten off more than I could chew, but I kept pushing forward. In the second year, I expanded my services. Instead of just offering digital marketing, I started providing web development and SEO services as well. I built a stronger team, hired specialists in these areas, and positioned my company as a one-stop shop for small businesses. This move paid off. We started attracting larger clients who needed more comprehensive digital solutions. But the biggest breakthrough came in the third year. I was introduced to an investor who was looking to fund a business that was on the verge of significant growth. He saw potential in my company and offered me the capital I needed to take things to the next level. With his help, we expanded into new markets, hired more staff, and launched a more aggressive marketing campaign. Fast forward to today, and my company is a multi-million-dollar business. We have a team of 50-plus employees, a steady stream of clients, and a reputation for delivering top-notch digital marketing services. I've been able to move into a beautiful office building, and I no longer have to worry about bills or where my next paycheck is coming from. Looking back, I realized that the hardest part wasn't starting the business. It was taking that first step when everything seemed uncertain. The hardest part was believing in myself when no one else did. There were so many moments when I could have given up, when I thought I wasn't cut out for this. But I kept going, and now I'm living proof that anything is possible if you don't give up on your dreams. To anyone who's thinking about starting their own business, I have one piece of advice: just do it. Stop waiting for the perfect time or the perfect plan. There will never be a perfect time. Start small, make mistakes, learn from them, and keep pushing forward. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it. When I first started my business, I had no idea what I was doing. In fact, I had no experience in the industry at all. I was just a regular guy, fresh out of college, with a degree in English and a head full of dreams. I had a passion for food, but no formal training in the culinary arts. I didn't even know how to run a business. But I had one thing going for me. I was determined to make it work. It all started on a Saturday morning when I was walking through my local farmer's market. As I strolled past booths filled with organic vegetables, handmade jams, and artisanal cheeses, I overheard a vendor talking about how much business they were doing. That moment struck me. I realized that people loved fresh, quality products, especially when they came from local sources. I had been working a boring desk job at the time, and I was tired of it. The grind of 9 to 5 life was draining my energy, and I felt like I was just going through the motions. But after hearing that vendor talk about how she was building her own little empire, I decided it was time to take the leap. I didn't have any money saved up, I had no business plan, and I certainly didn't know how to cook, but I knew I could find a way to make it work. That day, I went home and started researching. I spent the next week learning everything I could about food trucks. I watched countless YouTube videos, read articles, and talked to anyone I could find who had experience in the industry. I figured that a food truck was a much more affordable option than opening a brick-and-mortar restaurant, and it would give me the flexibility to test different menus and locations without committing to a long-term lease. I had a vague idea of what I wanted to sell, but I had no clear concept. I started brainstorming, trying to come up with something unique, something that would set me apart from the hundreds of other food trucks in the area. After some trial and error, I landed on the idea of fusion cuisine, combining traditional dishes with bold, international flavors. I wanted to create something that would surprise people, something they'd never seen before but would fall in love with immediately. But here's the catch. I didn't know how to cook. At all. I couldn't even boil an egg without messing it up. But I figured I could learn, right? I spent months experimenting with recipes in my tiny apartment kitchen, burning more meals than I cared to count. I reached out to chefs and food experts for advice, and I took every free class I could find online. Slowly but surely, I began to get the hang of it. I wasn't a master chef by any means, but I was able to create a menu that I felt proud of. The next step was finding a food truck. That was an ordeal in itself. Food trucks aren't cheap, and I didn't have much money saved. I started looking for used trucks online, but most of them were either in terrible condition or way out of my budget. I eventually found one that was decent, but it still needed a lot of work. I took out a loan, pooled together whatever savings I had, and bought the truck. The next few months were a blur. I spent every waking hour working on the truck, fixing it up, installing equipment, and making sure it was ready to hit the streets. I worked late into the night, fueled by the excitement of finally pursuing my dream. But, as anyone who started a business knows, things didn't exactly go smoothly. The first day I opened for business, I was a nervous wreck. I had a line of people waiting, which was great, but I quickly realized that I had no idea how to manage a crowd. The food wasn't coming out fast enough. I was fumbling with orders, and the kitchen was a disaster. I was trying to cook while simultaneously taking orders and managing the cash register, and it was overwhelming. People were starting to complain, and I was on the verge of tears. But I didn't give up. I took a deep breath, focused, and made it through the day. The food wasn't perfect, but people loved it. They kept coming back for more. The feedback was incredibly positive, and that kept me going. Over the next few weeks, I fine-tuned my process. I hired a couple of employees to help with the truck, and slowly but surely, things started to improve. One of the biggest challenges I faced was marketing. I had zero experience with social media or branding, but I knew that if I wanted to succeed, I had to build a following. I started posting pictures of my food on Instagram, offering discounts to people who tagged their friends, and sharing behind-the-scenes glimpses of life on the truck. At first, the response was small, but eventually it snowballed. Word of mouth spread, and people started sharing their experiences on social media. Before I knew it, my truck had a loyal customer base. But even with a growing following, I still had a lot to learn. There were times when I wanted to throw in the towel, when I felt like the stress and exhaustion were too much to handle. I spent countless sleepless nights thinking about my business, wondering if I was on the right track. I struggled with cash flow issues, staffing problems, and keeping up with demand. But through it all, I learned to lean on the people around me, my team, my family, and my customers. Over the years, my food truck grew. We started adding new locations, catering events, and even launching a second truck. I eventually opened a small storefront where people could come and sit down, and we expanded our menu to include more dishes. Things were looking up, but it wasn't always easy. One of the most rewarding moments came a few years in when I got an email from a major food critic who had tried my truck and wanted to write a review. It felt surreal. This critic was someone whose opinions I had read for years, and to know they had enjoyed my food was a huge validation. Today, my business is thriving. I have a team of 20 employees, multiple trucks on the road, and a loyal customer base that continues to grow. I've expanded into other cities, and I'm now looking into franchising. But it wasn't always this way. There were so many times when I doubted myself, when I wanted to give up. I'm not a business genius or a master chef. I'm just a guy who took a chance on his dream and refused to quit. Looking back, I realized that starting my business was the best decision I ever made. It wasn't easy, and there were plenty of setbacks along the way, but the lessons I learned were invaluable. The most important lesson, though, is this: if you have a passion and are willing to work hard, anything is possible. No one's journey is the same, but if you keep pushing forward, you'll find your way. I still work long hours, and I still face challenges every day, but now I do it with a sense of pride and purpose. My story isn't about getting rich or being an overnight success. It's about the struggle, the hustle, and the satisfaction that comes from building something from the ground up. And I wouldn't change a thing. I was never supposed to be an entrepreneur. In fact, for most of my life, the thought of running a business seemed like a distant dream. I grew up in a small town where most people worked in factories or retail jobs, and ambition was seen as something unattainable for people like us. But one decision, one fateful night in my early 20s, would change the course of my life forever. It all started when I was working as a bartender in a dive bar. I wasn't exactly proud of my job, but it paid the bills. I had dropped out of college after my second year because I didn't feel like I was learning anything that could be applied to real life. I'd heard countless people talk about the importance of a degree, but it never made sense to me. What I didn't realize was that the lessons I was about to learn wouldn't come from a classroom. They would come from the most unlikely source, a conversation with an older man named Jack. Jack was a regular at the bar. He was a quiet guy in his 60s, graying hair, always wearing a faded denim jacket. He'd come in every Wednesday night, order the same whiskey, and sit at the same stool by the corner. Most of the time, he didn't talk much, but when he did, it was clear he had been around the block a few times. I didn't know it back then, but Jack was a retired entrepreneur who had built and sold several businesses throughout his life. He had seen success and failure up close, and he had learned from both. One evening, after a slow shift, Jack struck up a conversation with me as I was cleaning glasses behind the bar. He asked me what my dreams were, and I honestly told him I didn't really have any. At that point, I was just getting by, trying to survive day to day. He looked at me for a long time, almost as if he was sizing me up. "You know," Jack said, "you don't have to just get by. You could be more than this. You have it in you, but you need to stop waiting for something to happen and start making it happen." At first, I laughed it off. What did I know about starting a business? My family had no money, and I didn't even have a clear vision of what I wanted to do. But Jack wasn't one to back down. He told me he'd seen many people who felt the same way, but the difference between those who succeeded and those who stayed stuck was one thing: taking action. "You'll never have all the answers," he said, "but you can learn. The key is to start. You don't need $1 million to get started, just an idea and the will to make it happen." That conversation stuck with me. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if Jack was right? What if I could build something for myself? After all, I wasn't getting any younger, and the thought of being stuck in the same cycle for the rest of my life was terrifying. I didn't have a business idea at that point, but I knew I had to start somewhere. I began reading everything I could get my hands on about entrepreneurship. Books, blogs, podcasts, you name it. I was consuming knowledge every spare moment I had. It was overwhelming at first, but I soon realized that most successful entrepreneurs didn't have some magical insight. They just took the leap and figured it out as they went. A few months later, I got my first real business idea. I had always loved coffee, and I noticed there weren't any good independent coffee shops in town. There was one Starbucks, but it was always crowded and impersonal. I began to envision a small, cozy cafe where people could come, relax, and connect over a cup of high-quality coffee. I wanted to create a place that felt like home, a community hub where people could escape from their busy lives. I was still bartending full-time, but I started saving every penny I could to fund the venture. I didn't have a business partner or any investors, just a dream and a determination to make it work. I found a small space in a strip mall, one that had been vacant for months, and I signed a lease. I used what little savings I had to buy the essentials, an espresso machine, some basic furniture, and ingredients for the coffee. Opening day was a blur. I remember being terrified, wondering if anyone would even show up. I had no experience running a business, no marketing budget, and no idea what I was doing. The first few weeks were rough. Business was slow, and I was barely making enough to cover expenses. I spent hours every day behind the counter, learning everything I could about customer service, inventory, and marketing. But something strange happened. Slowly, people started to take notice. Word of mouth spread, and before long, the cafe became a local favorite. People loved the atmosphere, the quality of the coffee, and the personal touch I put into every cup. I started to build a loyal customer base, and my confidence grew. I was no longer just surviving, I was thriving. But success didn't come without challenges. As the cafe grew, so did the demands. I had to hire employees, deal with suppliers, and manage cash flow. There were days when I felt completely overwhelmed, ready to throw in the towel. But every time I thought about quitting, I remembered Jack's words, "You can't give up. You have to keep moving forward, even when it's hard." I pushed through the tough times, and over the next 5 years, the cafe turned into a small chain. I opened 2 more locations in nearby towns, and each one was met with the same success as the first. I learned how to delegate, how to scale, and most importantly, how to keep my customers happy. The dream that had once seemed so impossible had become a reality. Fast forward to today, and my coffee company is a thriving business with multiple locations, an online store, and a loyal following. I still remember the days when I was cleaning glasses in that dive bar, unsure of what my future held. Now, I look back with pride at everything I've built, but I never forget where I started. Entrepreneurship isn't easy, but it's one of the most rewarding experiences I could have ever imagined. And Jack? He's still a regular at my cafe. Every Wednesday night, he comes in for his whiskey, sits at his usual spot, and gives me a nod of approval. I'll always be grateful to him for giving me that push when I needed it most. If it weren't for his words of wisdom, I might still be stuck in that bar, wondering what could have been. If you're reading this and you feel stuck, remember, you don't need to have everything figured out. You just need to take that first step, no matter how small. The road will be difficult, but with persistence and determination, you can build something amazing. It won't happen overnight, but if you keep going, one day you'll look back and realize that the dream you once thought was impossible is now your reality. So, if you're hesitant, just know that the journey is worth it. And who knows? Maybe one day, you'll be the one giving someone else the advice that changes their life. I was 22 when I first started my business. I had just graduated from college with a degree in marketing, but honestly, I had no idea what I wanted to do with it. I'd worked a few internships during school, and while they gave me some solid experience, none of them really lit a fire in me. It wasn't that I disliked marketing. I just couldn't see myself in the corporate grind long term. I wanted something different, something bigger. I remember sitting in my small, cramped apartment one evening after an especially frustrating day at a temp job I was working to make ends meet. I was answering customer service emails for a local retailer, and I had just been yelled at by a customer who was upset that their package was delayed due to weather. As I stared at my computer screen, I felt like I had hit a wall. I was tired of making minimum wage, tired of feeling like I was going nowhere. That's when I had a thought: what if I could start my own business? I had no idea what that business would look like, but the idea of being my own boss felt liberating. I had always been passionate about fitness, but I didn't have the capital to open a gym, and I wasn't about to spend my days trying to convince people to buy overpriced gym memberships. I needed to think outside the box. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of research. I devoured books on entrepreneurship and success stories of people who had turned small ideas into multi-million-dollar businesses. I scoured the internet for inspiration and looked at niches that seemed untapped. That's when I stumbled across the idea of custom athletic wear, specifically clothes that were comfortable, stylish, and functional for both workouts and casual wear. The more I looked into it, the more it made sense. There were brands out there, of course, but none that truly seemed to hit the mark in terms of affordable, stylish, and functional gear that could transition from gym to streetwear. So, I decided to give it a shot. I didn't have any money to speak of, but I had a few things going for me: determination, a willingness to learn, and a knack for marketing. I knew I needed to learn about clothing production, fabric types, and the logistics of building a brand. So, I started cold emailing manufacturers, asking for quotes and details on how to get started with creating a line of athletic wear. Most responses were either too expensive or completely uninterested. But then, one day, I received a reply from a manufacturer in China. They were willing to work with me, even with my small order size. I was ecstatic. This was my big break. I had saved up about $2,000 from my temp job, so I used every penny to place a small order for a batch of custom leggings and workout shirts. I had absolutely no experience designing clothing, so I used basic graphic design tools to put together some simple logos and designs. It wasn't high-end, but it was enough to get me started. I set up a Shopify store and began promoting my products on social media, particularly Instagram, since I knew it was a platform that attracted fitness enthusiasts. At first, sales were slow, really slow. I would spend hours each day posting, engaging with followers, and trying to get people to notice my brand. I didn't have much of a marketing budget, so everything I did was organic. I reached out to micro-influencers, offering them free products in exchange for posts. Some agreed, others didn't, but eventually, I found a few influencers who were passionate about my products and started promoting them to their followers. In the first month, I made only a few $100s in sales. It wasn't much, but it was something. I reinvested that money into creating new designs and expanding my product range. The next month, I saw an uptick in orders. I was still working my temp job, but now, the dream of building a business felt more real. By month 3, I had doubled my revenue. Word of mouth and influencer promotions had helped a lot, but it was the little things that made the biggest difference. I started paying attention to customer feedback, what they liked, what they didn't, and how I could improve. I also began refining my social media strategy, using Instagram stories, engaging more with followers, and sharing customer testimonials. Slowly, my brand started to gain traction. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Around the 6-month mark, I ran into a huge issue. My first batch of leggings had some serious manufacturing defects. Some of the stitching was coming undone, and a few of the logos were faded. It was a disaster. I had just made enough money to restock and expand my offerings, but now I had to deal with unhappy customers and returns. I could have folded under the pressure, but I refused to quit. I immediately contacted the manufacturer, explained the situation, and demanded a replacement batch. Thankfully, they were willing to send new items, but it delayed my plans. During that time, I was also learning about the logistics of shipping and inventory management. I had originally been storing everything at home, but the growing number of orders meant I needed a more efficient system. I rented a small storage unit and hired a part-time assistant to help with packing and shipping. It was a learning curve, but it felt good to be growing. By the end of year 1, I had managed to hit $100,000 in sales. It wasn't anything crazy in the grand scheme of things. But for a 22-year-old just out of college with no previous business experience, it felt like a massive achievement. I quit my temp job and focused on my brand full-time. The next year was all about scaling. I invested in Facebook and Google ads to drive traffic, expanded my product line to include accessories like gym bags and water bottles, and collaborated with more influencers to help spread the word. I also made sure to keep improving the quality of my products and focused on building a community around my brand. I was no longer just selling clothes. I was selling a lifestyle. 3 years into the business, I hit my first major milestone $1 million in sales. I couldn't believe it. There were still challenges, of course, logistics, customer service issues, and the constant pressure to stay relevant in a competitive market, but I had finally achieved what I had set out to do, build something of my own. Looking back, it wasn't easy. There were countless sleepless nights, moments of doubt, and more than a few times when I thought I should just give up. But the key was staying persistent, learning from mistakes, and always pushing forward. I still have a long way to go, but I'm proud of what I've built. Now, I'm 25, and my company is a full-fledged operation with employees, a warehouse, and a growing customer base. We're even looking into opening our first brick-and-mortar store in the next year. It's crazy to think that this all started with an idea in my tiny apartment, but I'm proof that if you're willing to take risks, learn on the fly, and put in the work, anything is possible. If there's one piece of advice I can give to aspiring entrepreneurs, it's this: don't let fear stop you. The road will be tough, and things won't always go according to plan, But if you believe in yourself and your vision, you can create something amazing. Never stop pushing forward, no matter how hard it gets. The journey is worth it. I still remember the first time I thought about starting a business. I was sitting in my cramped apartment in a small city, surrounded by empty pizza boxes, half-finished drafts of business ideas, and an overwhelming feeling of self-doubt. I had just lost my job as a junior developer at a tech startup. They were cutting costs, and I was the most recent hire, so I was the first to go. It wasn't like I was making a ton of money anyway, but it was a steady paycheck, and it made me feel secure, even if only for a little while. For weeks, I spiraled, unsure of what to do. I was in my late 20s, living paycheck to paycheck, and every time I thought about the future, I felt a mix of anxiety and dread. The idea of going back into the job market and applying for another low-paying gig made my stomach turn. I knew I wasn't cut out for working under someone else. I'd always dreamed of having my own business, but I never thought I was smart enough, disciplined enough, or experienced enough to make it happen. Then one afternoon, while scrolling through social media, I saw an ad that caught my attention. It was a simple, almost cliched image of a guy holding up his phone with a screenshot of his sales figures $50,000 in a month. The post claimed he made that money by creating and selling digital products, stuff like ebooks, courses, and guides. I remember reading it over and over, trying to understand how it was possible. I had no expertise in any specific field, and I didn't have the skills to create a product from scratch. But then I realized something. I had a bit of a niche interest that could be monetized. I had been building websites for friends and family for years, and I had learned a lot of little tricks to make sites look professional without needing to hire an expensive designer. I sat down, heart racing, and Googled how to create a digital product with no experience. What I found amazed me. There were entire communities, blogs, and courses dedicated to helping people create and sell digital products. I could learn everything I needed in a few weeks. There was no need to wait for the perfect moment or to have years of experience. I started with a website building guide. I figured if I could teach people how to build a simple, professional website in under an hour, I could probably sell it. I spent the next 3 weeks in a whirlwind of research, writing, and trial and error. I created step-by-step tutorials, recorded videos explaining how to use various website building platforms, and packaged it all together into an easy-to-follow guide. I had no clue if anyone would buy it, but I figured it couldn't hurt to try. I launched the guide on a basic landing page. I set the price at $19.99 because it felt like a reasonable amount for something that might be useful. I had no email list, no social media following, and no real marketing plan, just the product and a bit of hope. The first day was quiet. The second day was a little quieter. But then, on the third day, I got my first sale. I remember staring at the notification on my phone, half disbelieving, as the $19.99 appeared in my account. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was proof that people were willing to pay for what I had created. I felt a sense of validation and excitement I hadn't felt in a long time. I spent the next few weeks tweaking my landing page, refining the product, and learning more about marketing. I started reading blogs about SEO, email marketing, and social media ads. It was a steep learning curve, but every new piece of knowledge felt like a small victory. Slowly but surely, I began to make more sales. By the end of the first month, I had made just over $1,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to fuel my ambition. I reinvested every penny I made back into the business. I started creating more products, guides on SEO, social media marketing, and web design. I built an email list and started posting regularly on social media, sharing tips and tutorials. I even began creating free content to drive traffic to my website. I kept my overhead low. No office space, no employees, no fancy equipment. It was just me and my computer, working from my apartment. 6 months in, things were starting to snowball. I had my first $10,000 month. I couldn't believe it. I was making more than I had ever made at my job, and I didn't have to report to anyone or punch a clock. I was my own boss, and the sense of freedom was intoxicating. But I knew I couldn't rest on my laurels. I had to keep growing, keep learning, and keep pushing. By the end of the first year, I had made $100,000 in revenue. It was a turning point. I realized that what started as a side project had the potential to become a real business. I began to think about scaling, hiring contractors, outsourcing tasks, and eventually launching a membership site. I knew I had a lot of work ahead of me, but the dream I once thought impossible was now within my grasp. 2 years into my journey, I had built a full-fledged business. I had a small team that helped with customer support and content creation, and I was consistently bringing in 5 figures a month. I still ran the company from home, but now I was in a better place financially, emotionally, and professionally. It was no longer just about the money. It was about creating something that mattered, something I could be proud of. Looking back, there were a lot of moments when I wanted to quit. There were nights when I doubted myself and wondered if I was in over my head. But I learned that persistence is the key. It wasn't about having the perfect plan or the most elaborate strategy. It was about taking consistent action, learning from mistakes, and adapting. Today, my business is still growing. I'm not a millionaire, but I've reached a level of success I never thought was possible. I've created a life for myself that I'm proud of, and I've learned more than I ever expected. More importantly, I've found the confidence to trust myself. I'm not afraid of failure anymore because I know I can turn it into something valuable. My journey from being unemployed and unsure to building a thriving business has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone starting out, it's this: just start. You don't have to have everything figured out. You don't need a fancy degree or years of experience. You just need an idea, the willingness to learn, and the persistence to keep going, even when it seems impossible. There will be setbacks, but there will also be breakthroughs. You might not reach your goal overnight, but if you keep at it, you'll get there. And the view from the top is worth every bit of the climb. I was 24 years old when I made the decision that would change the course of my life. At the time, I was stuck in a dead-end job at a corporate office. The work was dull, the pay barely covered my bills, and the office environment was toxic. I could feel my creativity and ambition slipping away every day I clocked in. I wanted more. I wanted to build something for myself, something that would leave a mark. It all started when I found an old leather-bound notebook at a thrift store one afternoon. I had been browsing the shelves aimlessly when something about this notebook caught my eye. It was a vintage-looking piece, with a small clasp and a worn-out cover. When I opened it, I found that the pages were filled with a mix of sketches, diagrams, and jotted ideas. It wasn't just any notebook, it was someone's dream. As I thumbed through the pages, I realized something. This could be me. I could take my own ideas, my own dreams, and turn them into something real. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew one thing for certain: I was done playing it safe. The next morning, I handed in my resignation and walked out of that office for the last time. I had no backup plan, no investors, and no clear path forward, just a burning desire to create. I had an idea in my head for a small business that I believed had the potential to grow, and I was determined to make it happen. The idea was simple: personalized, handcrafted leather goods. It wasn't entirely original, but the personal touch was what I thought could set me apart. I wanted to create high-quality products that were not just functional, but also meaningful to the people who owned them. I imagined a customer receiving a custom leather wallet or journal, knowing it was made specifically for them with care and attention to detail. Starting from nothing, I had to learn quickly. I spent hours researching leather crafting techniques online, watching YouTube videos, and reading articles from experienced artisans. I didn't even own the tools I needed, so I borrowed money from my family to buy a basic set of equipment: knives, needles, thread, and some raw leather. At first, I worked out of my tiny apartment. The place was cramped, but it was enough. I would spend hours after work, cutting leather and stitching it by hand, even though I was still learning the craft. The process was slow, and I made many mistakes along the way. Some of the products came out looking terrible: crooked stitches, uneven edges, leather that was too stiff or too soft. But I didn't give up. I knew that every mistake was a lesson, and I could only get better with practice. The first few months were tough. I didn't have a website, and I barely had enough products to show anyone. I started selling small items on local marketplace apps, hoping that someone might be interested in what I was making. I had zero marketing budget, so I relied on word of mouth and organic growth. Slowly but surely, I started making sales. I remember the first time someone bought one of my wallets. It felt surreal, like I had just been validated in the most profound way. Someone believed in me, in what I was doing. At the same time, I realized how much work I had ahead of me. The first few orders came with their own set of challenges. I had to deal with packaging, shipping, and customer service, things I had never considered when I was just focused on making the product. But I kept going, learning, and adapting. I spent hours reading about e-commerce, setting up a website, and improving my SEO strategy. Every free moment was spent hustling. It wasn't long before I got my first real break. A popular Instagram influencer shared a post about one of my custom wallets, and suddenly, I was inundated with orders. I couldn't keep up with the demand at first, but it was the opportunity one needed to scale. I reached out to a few local leather artisans to help with production, and slowly but surely, I began building a team. I rented a small workshop and upgraded my equipment. My brand was growing, and I was finally seeing the fruits of my labor. However, the success came with its own set of problems. As the business grew, so did the pressure. The demands on my time and energy were overwhelming. I found myself working 12-hour days, struggling to balance my personal life with the needs of the business. There were moments when I thought about quitting, when I felt like I couldn't handle the stress. But every time I thought about throwing in the towel, I reminded myself of how far I had come. The idea of failure was unbearable. One of the biggest challenges I faced was navigating the competition. The market for handcrafted leather goods was becoming more saturated, and I had to figure out how to stand out. I spent months refining my products, developing new styles, and experimenting with different materials. I also started creating content for social media, sharing behind-the-scenes glimpses of my process and telling the story of how the brand came to life. This helped build a loyal customer base who resonated with the authenticity of my journey. Then came the moment I will never forget, the first time my business hit 6 figures in revenue. It wasn't a single moment, but a series of small victories and milestones that led me there. I had grown from working alone in a tiny apartment to running a full-fledged business with a team of artisans and a warehouse. We were shipping products worldwide, and people were reaching out from every corner of the globe. But even with all the success, I never lost sight of the most important thing, the passion that had fueled my journey from the start. I had built something from scratch, something that mattered to me and to the people who bought my products. My business was no longer just about making money. It was about creating something that would last. The brand was more than leather goods. It was a symbol of dedication, perseverance, and following your dreams. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far I've come. That vintage notebook from the thrift store started it all, and I can honestly say I've never been more grateful for the risks I took. Today, my business is thriving. I'm not just the owner. I'm still the craftsman, still the one who pours passion and care into every product that leaves the workshop. I've learned that success isn't just about making the right choices. It's about sticking with it, no matter how many mistakes you make or how tough the road gets. I often think about the person who owned that notebook before me. Whoever they were, I hope they know that their dream sparked something in me, and that spark has grown into a fire that's now lighting the way for others. The journey isn't over. I'm always striving to grow, to learn, and to push the boundaries of what I can create. But one thing is certain, I will never forget where it all began, in that little thrift store, with a notebook full of dreams. Now, as I look to the future, I'm planning to expand my business even further. I want to bring my brand to new markets and develop new products. And who knows? Maybe one day, my story will be the one that inspires someone else to take a leap of faith and chase their dreams. But no matter where I go from here, I'll always remember the most important lesson of all, that the journey, with all its ups and downs, is worth every single step. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.